Farewell to Nova Scotia, the sea-bound coast. Let your mountains dark and dreary be.
Nova Scotia at war, 1914, 1919. Well, I've been writing books and articles on Canadian military history now for over 20 years, and focusing on the First World War. And it dawned on me one day that nobody had ever written a book about Nova Scotia in the war, and it seemed to me there was an important enough story there that somebody ought to do it. I thought, well, could be me as well as anybody else, so I did it.
Yeah. And what were your takeaways from the experience of the war through Nova Scotian eyes? What was unique about it, or just, significant?
Well, aside from the common themes that you would have anywhere in Canada about men volunteering and women going as nurses and all the rest of it, Nova Scotia was unique because it was on the Atlantic coast. And when the submarine war reached the Western Atlantic, and they were sinking ships, those ships were sailing out of Sydney and Halifax Harbour, and even some of the fishing ports, Lunenburg and Yarmouth and so on. And in the summer of 1918, they sank a lot of ships. And so Nova Scotia was, in fact, physically involved in the war in a way that no other part of Canada was.
And aside from the stories of the battalions and the men that went over, you tell that side of the story too, or is it mainly about the Nova Scotia experience in Canada?
It's both. I talk about the men who volunteered, went overseas, but of course a number of men who volunteered were not allowed to go overseas because there was coastal defense. They were very concerned up until 1916 about German ships. Not submarines yet, because they couldn't sail that far, but ships coming in and bombarding Halifax, which was an important naval port and had a fortress, and Sydney, which was a naval port and a very, very important commercial port because it had the coal mines in Canada, in eastern Canada, and 2 steel plants. So they needed to be guarded just in case. So there were about 4,000 men most of whom wanted to go overseas but weren't allowed to, and so they guarded harbors and other installations. But there's that, but there's also the impact on the home front, of course, the industry, big munitions industry. In fact, the munitions industry in Canada was actually started by the manager of a steel plant in New Glasgow. Most people probably don't know that, but he was the one that really started this shell industry. So there's a whole social aspect and conscription issue, everything. I tried to do everything in the book.
Right.
For when I am far away on the briny ocean tossed, will you ever heave a sigh and a wish for me?